Hello and welcome to the Belong Collective. We are happy to have you join us today, and we thank you for taking the time to worship with us this morning. If you're new with us, the Belong Collective is an inclusive, Jesus-shaped community practicing the way of love for the good of all. If you're interested to learn more about the Belong Collective, especially if you want to connect with us for your first time, you can head to our website at thebelongcollective.org and click the Connect tab to find out more. Likewise, if you'd like to support what the Belong Collective is doing, you can head to the same website and click the Give tab to find out more on how you can do that. If you'd like to stay connected with us further beyond the website, feel free to connect with us on all of our socials. We have a public Facebook page along with a private Facebook group, and likewise, we have an Instagram. So feel free to follow us there, connect with us there. We'd love to connect with you further as we move on. And once again, thank you so much for joining us here at the Belong Collective. We are sincerely joyous and happy that you're able to be with us this morning, and we hope you walk away with further growth and further fruitful conversations and development with this community.
The Belong Collective has learned of an opportunity to bring some smiles to some seniors this Easter. The Salvation Army, of whom we've been closely connected with over the years, is organizing a collection of a whole bunch of items to go in Easter gift bags for seniors in local nursing homes. And they're asking for the community to contribute, and we thought we would ask our community to contribute large print word search booklets, small packs of tissues, lip balm, small hand lotions. The Salvation Army is also going to be adding magazines, socks, and an Easter card. All of these items should be received at their office no later than March 15th, and their office is located at 506 South 29th Street, Harrisburg, PA 17104. The Salvation Army is also asking for two specific things. Any items that are going to be purchased, please sign up so that they know who is getting what. And when you sign up on the website that I'm about to give you, you'll see that they're asking for people to gather and deliver these items in amounts of 25 or 30. So if you're gonna get large print word searches, which I just bought 25 today online, I found a bulk amount of them, you would get 25. So don't go to the store and just buy like 5 or 10. Like, you'll see in the link a list of the multiples of 25 and 30. So if you want to buy 50 of something, you would sign up for 2 multiples of 25. So anyways, the sign up link is at www.ttsu.me/TSA seniors. And we'll post the link on our social media pages as well. So we hope that you'll join us in this effort to bring some smiles to some seniors this Easter. Thanks so much.
Good morning and welcome to the Belong Collective. We are continuing our series on our values. We've been talking about this for a few weeks now. We are on the 4th value, and you can find all of our values at our website if you'd like. Just the drop-down bar, click values, and you'll be able to see it there. Today, the value we are talking about is overcoming church stereotypes. And before I even get into it, I just want to say this is a huge part of who we are. We desire to be a different kind of church, and we wrote a lot about this, so it's a lot to kind of take in right off the bat. So I'm just going to let you know, settle in as we kind of talk about the paragraph or two that exist under this header of overcoming church stereotypes. Here it is. We value a flexible theology that is unafraid of real life questions, elevating faithful questioning over unquestioning obedience. Everything is evolving, including our faith and connection to the divine. Questions are the gateway through which we grow communally and individually. Just as a child is exploring their world and therefore engages their parents with question after question, we believe the community of faith should be a place where questions are not simply allowed, but invited. The community of faith throughout history has had a number of beautiful, life-giving, and loving theologies and practices. But there have been, and currently are, many ugly, destructive, and hate-filled theologies and practices. It is our hope that the community of faith would continue to evolve toward a more beautiful, life-giving, and loving theology and practice. We do this by owning our past failures and seeking to reconcile that which has been broken, while embodying a flexible theology open to the leading of the Spirit. So I just want to talk really quick what I mean by flexible theology. Like, what do we mean by that? Because a lot of people, that is going to be maybe even a trigger, because the way we're handed theology, and being someone who has went to school and studied theology, opened these really thick books that are titled systematic theology, is exactly that. We've been taught that theology is a system. You believe this and that, and it equals this, and this and that equals this. And we've just systematized our entire theology and our perspective on God. And so theology, if you're unfamiliar, just is talking about our belief of God. Like, what do we believe about God? And so for many, we might get in a room and we might have all different kinds of beliefs about God and thoughts about God. And for some communities, we've made certain things dogma, meaning just like the center of the bullseye, that really throughout church history, the church has been a lot more flexible about, or maintained a variety of views on. When we talk about a flexible theology, what we're talking about is as we open the scriptures and we desire to know who God is and know how to relate to God and our neighbor, that this should be a process, not that we're trying to put together a book of exacting out who God is and how everyone should believe like me, but instead a process that each person is on and a journey they're on toward discovering who God is, and also an admission in humility that we know so little. And so when we decide to hold so tightly to something we know so little about, it typically puts us in a position of error, is what I guess I would say, or at least I found that to be my experience. And I think a lot of people at the Belong Collective have found that to be their experience, that when we lack humility and when we have a lot of pride in our theology, it tends to do destructive things, not only to us, but those around us. And so we desire to have a flexible theology. I think of my life, what I believed 5 years ago, what I believed 10 years ago, what I believed 15 years ago, what I believed as a child about God. There are still things I believed about God when I was a child that I still believe today. There's a lot that I believe differently. There's a lot that I've grown in my own experience as an individual, as a person, my own experience communally, hearing other people's stories and learning from other people's interactions with God. And there's a lot I've just learned as I've processed deeply my own kind of spirit, processed prayer. I would argue the Spirit's leading in my life. And so when we talk about a flexible theology, what is necessary for a community to have a flexible theology is to allow for questions. I don't know about you, but I grew up in some faith communities that allowed questions and some that were very rigid and didn't, or some that said we allow questions, these 90% of questions, but that 10%'s off limits to question. And so we want to be a community that you can question anything. You're exploring. And not to use the child metaphor in that you're a child. We're all children in a sense, we're all exploring, right? But if you are a parent and you've ever had a child who's just asking question after question after question after question, I remember there were times when my kids would ask just so many questions, I would be like, you're only allowed 5 questions today. So use them wisely. And they'd come to me and I'd be like, all right, before you ask this question, I'm going to take one off the board. And I'd have a running count, and then they'd be out of questions and they'd still have questions. And I don't know, I'm a softie, so I'd still answer their questions. But the point being, we learn through questioning. We grow through questioning. This is part of the process. And what's so unique is that even as we have a Bible where the Old Testament is the Jewish Old Testament, we have rabbis who in entire process of teaching was through questioning. Like that was a practice. And so questioning isn't bad, even in relation to theology, even in relation to learning about God. This was a way of learning that would be celebrated in the ancient world of questioning and wrestling together and sharing new ideas. And so we want to be a community that has a flexible theology. We're not going to hold so tight to something that ultimately you're not allowed here if you don't believe like us on this. I mean, outside of Jesus is the exact representation of God and that we are called to embody love and we desire to be a school of love. These are kind of our two centers, and that Jesus is the exact representation of God even in love. Like we see love fully when we look at Jesus. Questions about things like how the world's going to end, what the book of Revelation means, what about hell and heaven, what about prophecy, what about, I could go down the rabbit trail on, what happens when you take communion, what's actually taking place there, what about baptism, should babies be baptized or only adults? These are things that the church at times has literally killed people over. I just want you to understand, we have a history where there was a time when people would get killed over their view of baptism. Think about that for a minute. We desire to be a space where it is okay to be part of this community and have a different theology than I have, like the pastor or the board or the worship leader. It's okay to have a flexible theology, ultimately because we're not making this community, we're not valuing this community around how right we are about God. We're valuing this community about how open we are to exploring together who God is, asking the questions of one another, and ultimately growing together in that journey. And it ultimately being more about Jesus and love than any of these other check marks that we might get right, because Jesus didn't come to make our theology right. Jesus came to make our love full in the world. And so we want that to be our echo, the small impact this community is going to have on the church is hopefully the echo that look, Jesus was embodied in that community. Love was embodied in that community. If the echo instead is perfect and right theology was embodied in that community, I don't know that I would be proud of that as a pastor, because I don't know that we can really test that would be my answer. But even that, the way someone feels loved is the way they experience the divine. And so let us hopefully allow people around us as a community, but also as individuals that are part of this community, share that love, share that experience with the divine through the way we love one another. Now, we own our past failures. We had said that in there. We own our past failures. And I just want to acknowledge, the church has failed so much and is failing even now and will continue to fail into the future because humans are part of the church. But that is not an excuse, especially for the systematic failures of the church, the failures of recognizing and uprooting the racist systems within the church, failure to recognize and uproot the homophobic and transphobic realities within the church. I could go on and on, but ultimately we have a lot of issues on a social level that the church has not necessarily helped. And you can trace this back through history. The church, many influential pastors, many churchgoers were pro-slavery. Yes, there were also abolitionists who followed Jesus who were on the other side of that. Don't hear me saying that all Christians were against this, but a significant majority of Christians were for slavery and using right theology to prove it. And we don't even have to go back that far in our own history. Some of you might have even been alive when pastors were during the 60s using scripture to argue against desegregation. That ultimately, the scriptures proved that God desired that the races would be separate. And they would go to passages and they would say, this is right theology. Wow. That's a church that's elevating right theology over loving your neighbor as yourself. We're not going to be that church. We want to own our past failures. We want to seek reconciliation. for that that's been broken. We want to chart a different course that's more led by the Spirit and led by love. And so when we talk about overcoming church stereotypes, the church stereotype is that we've always done it that way and you're not doing it right, or this is how we've always done it. I don't know if you've ever heard these things before. I was a youth pastor, and when I was a youth pastor, that was one of the things that would just send me into like a whirlwind of frustration whenever someone would tell me, we do it this way because we've always done it this way. And I'm like, that is the worst reason to ever do something that way again. It might be we do it this way because last year we did it this way and it works really well this way. And here's the 5 reasons why it works really well. Here's the couple things we can tweak. I'm fine with that. The thing is for so many of us, we've not only been taught that our theology and our rightness of theology is like king and superior, but also the way we practice things, the songs we sing, the way we sing them. There's literally like, there was what's called like the drum war, if you will, of like the 90s of whether or not you should have drums in the church. And some of you might even have been at churches, there's still churches that are going through it that are just 30 years behind everyone else. But why can't we have drums in church? Because it doesn't glorify God. And like, really, drums don't glorify God? What if you're a drummer? I guess you're not glorifying God. I don't know. The truth is we find these petty things to argue about, and it just fits this church stereotype of churches aren't relevant. They're not connecting with people where they are. They're high and mighty, living in their high and mighty spaces, but ultimately they're not connecting with real people. And so I want to read a passage of scripture, actually a few passages of scripture for you. And this is in Mark chapter 2, and it starts in verse 13. We're actually going to cover 3 different stories of Jesus. And the reason we're going to cover 3 different stories is because I want to show you how Jesus overcame the stereotypes of the first century and was ultimately constantly being told, Jesus, you aren't doing it right. Why are you doing it that way? You're not supposed to do it that way. Because here's the deal. The Belong Collective is going to be told a lot, and you're probably going to hear it as someone who attends this community. You're not doing it right. Don't do it that way. And I just want to show you, look, Jesus had the same problem in his world in the first century. So Mark chapter 2, verse 13. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. So just really quick here, Levi is a tax collector, and Jesus said, come follow me. Really quick, tax collectors are the most despised people at this time, and Jesus just looked at a tax collector and said, come follow me, a rabbi who's supposed to be like the highest of the high, you know what I mean, in pure practitioner of like the faith, right? And so these two don't really mix, and Jesus has just said, oh, come follow me. You can be part of this thing, which is completely upside down, completely overcoming the stereotype of a rabbi in the first century, or anyone seeking to follow Jesus and have a ministry in the first century. This overcomes it in so many ways, but it continues to show the friction that causes. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. Really quick, I think it's interesting that the teachers of the law come to the disciples, not to Jesus. They're like, why is he doing that? Why is he, why is he doing it that way? That's not the way it's done. How dare he do it that way? How dare he eat with tax collectors and sinners? That's not the way we do things around here. And he's doing it completely different. And then he says it's because it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And so I just want to say, like, Jesus is clearly overcoming the stereotypes of his day in this case, right? Like, he's challenging the systems of his day by not only eating with tax collectors and sinners, but calling one of them to follow him. Like that would have been incredibly challenging for first century faith leaders. They would have seen that and they would have felt like it was a critique on them, but also lacked righteousness and holiness and proper values, whatever you want to throw in there. I don't think they would have been too pumped with Jesus's way of doing things, okay? Immediately following this, we have another story, and here's how this story reads. Now, John's disciples and Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, "How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?" Okay, so this is a direct comparison to John's disciples and the Pharisees' disciples. In essence, the stereotypes, the religious stereotypes of the day were doing it this way, but Jesus wasn't. And here's the answer Jesus gives. Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. Now, he pours new wine into new wineskins." Now, I'm not going to get into all the imagery of Jesus' response here, but the point is Jesus' response is pretty much, I'm doing something new. I'm doing something different. And the way you guys are doing it, okay, but this is the way I'm called to do this. This is the way, like he's talking about even himself. How can, like they're with me, they're with Jesus. And like he hasn't necessarily at this point said who he is publicly, but he's emphasizing it even in code here. So there's a lot going on here, but I'm just trying to emphasize that every time Jesus kind of steps out the normal lines, he's challenged by the religious leaders of the day. Interesting. He's not challenged by atheists. He's not challenged by sinners. He's not challenged by the prostitutes. He's not challenged by the tax collectors. They're not the ones coming and saying, "How dare you do it that way?" He's challenged by the people that ultimately are the ones following God. Like it's interesting to see that the biggest challengers, the biggest retractors here are those who are following God. Okay, again, immediately following that story. So this is just one portion of the Bible where we have three stories that follow each other where Jesus is challenged. Honestly, if you read the New Testament and you pick one of the Gospels and you just read through it, you're going to see Jesus consistently overcoming the stereotypes of the faith leaders of his time. But here we go. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" This is big. This is unlawful. So the two things prior were Jesus overcoming the stereotypes of how the Pharisees did things, even how John's disciples did things. But now this is unlawful. There's legitimate Old Testament scriptures that say you can't do this, and they are doing it. So the law has spoken. It's plain and clear. Yet Jesus is allowing his disciples to do something else. He needs to get his disciples in line. The answer to this question for a good rabbi is to condemn the actions of his disciples. That's the proper answer. What does Jesus say? Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." He reinterprets their view of the Sabbath. He says there's a different view here. There's another way of seeing the Sabbath. And that way is not this restrictive, you're not allowed to do anything type perspective, but instead that the Sabbath, like you can even, and he does so by even saying, well, what about this one time where David did it this way? David's one of your heroes. What about what he did? And that's only for priests. David's not a priest, and David's not the high priest, and he went in and did this. And then he also says that the Sabbath was made for man. Like, this is a gift, not something that you ultimately are supposed to treat like this religious dogma, black and white way of being, but ultimately it's supposed to be a blessing. And so he, instead of just railing against it, he also gives them a different perspective. He says, okay, well, that's how you've come to know the scriptures, but what about these other what about this other scripture? And what about this other perspective that maybe the Sabbath is actually for us, that God desires we would rest, God doesn't require some religious ritual that we go through that, like, when we deny ourselves, we are ultimately going to make God happy. We are going to appease God. But what if the Sabbath is God knowing we needed to pause and reflect and rest? The point of these three stories is that Jesus hangs out with the wrong people. He's criticized. Jesus then decides that, around fasting and around his disciples not fasting the proper way, not doing the proper thing the way the other disciples of the day were doing, not having the proper rituals, he gets condemned. Then Jesus goes so far to do something unlawful on the Sabbath, but then even, I would say, goes further by defending it, by using the story of David to say this is why it's acceptable, which is interesting because it's just interesting to see Jesus actually use a passage over here to kind of defend his actions currently, but then also reframe the whole question of is Sabbath supposed to be this deeply restrictive thing, or is it supposed to be this life-giving thing where we get rest? Overcoming church stereotypes, or overcoming faith community stereotypes, is not a new thing. We could trace it all the way back to Jesus and even before Jesus. We are in the tradition of Jesus as we challenge the stereotypes that exist in our world. And we are also in the tradition of the prophets that came before. And so as we talk about overcoming church stereotypes, I just want to say, even as we're in the middle of coronavirus, it's so weird. This is the anniversary, or I guess a day after the anniversary of me making a video and saying we weren't going to be having our gathering because of coronavirus. So it's been 366 days since then. And who would have known we'd be here where I'm talking to you on YouTube or Facebook? These weren't necessarily ideal circumstances, right? None of us wanted this, but the church was able to continue even digitally. And there's some who would even say, well, digitally gathering in this way is not right. It's not the way of Jesus. How dare you? And there's some who say, okay, as soon as we get back, we're not going to continue our online church because that's not the way the church is meant to gather. And I have some sympathy for that, in that we're meant for community and to be in community with one another. But every new technology that comes out, it seems like the church has to have an opinion of limitation about it. Or it seems like the church has to kind of say, well, we've never done it that way before, so we can't consider how we would do it that way. I want you to know what I'm thinking about doing when we get back together. I don't think when we do get back together for services regularly, whenever that happens, hopefully sooner than later, but whenever that day comes where we're able to come back with any kind of normalcy in community together, I don't think we need to just sit and listen to me share a sermon. It might be that what we actually need is to connect as a community. Maybe the sermon comes out on Monday, and on Sunday when we gather, all of us have watched it on YouTube or Facebook, and we just talk about it. Maybe the sermon comes out on YouTube and we meet in home groups and talk about it if we're not able to go back to meeting. I don't know. I'm throwing out ideas. But the point is, and by the way, none of those ideas are concrete. These are things I'm throwing out as ideas. I just know for many of us, what we've lacked over the season is not knowledge of a sermon or the ability to access sermons. We can access a lot of sermons online, but we miss human connection. And the church should be a place that's certainly connecting with us where we need it most. And the church can be flexible. at least under our value system, that we can flex and consider different models and modes of doing church. Because for us, it's not this fixed idea, like this Sabbath idea that how dare you do that on the Sabbath? Because my goodness, you're way outside of God's will if you do it that way. For us, it's more about how do we meet the needs of our community? What does that look like? And we're willing to experiment even in that, because this value allows us a lot of room to experiment with what works best. So join us on this journey. Like, for some of us, a flexible theology is the scariest thing ever, because we've always been taught that we're saved by our right theology. Really, think about that. Like, we've been taught, like, if you don't believe the right things, you're going to hell. Someone told you that maybe once. That's not how we're saved. Like, following after Jesus is about loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. As we do that work, we are in the process of working out our salvation following Jesus. So ultimately, this value is for you and even me. I have questions. Don't think I have it all figured out. I have questions today, and I'll have new questions in a week or a month or a year. Like, I know it. And I love that I'm in a community where it's okay and it's safe for me to have questions. I hope you feel a sense of relief that you're in a community where you don't have to hide the questions you might be wrestling with about who God is, about how God operates, but instead you can voice those. We think that's really important, and we think that's incredibly life-giving. And we would rather be led by the Spirit than some dogma that binds us and can become destructive the more pride we place in it. So hopefully this particular value is life-giving for you and encourages you. We have 2 more values to go in this series. Let me pray for you and this community as we continue to overcome church stereotypes. Good and gracious God, may we be a community that overcomes church stereotypes, not just for the sake of overcoming a church stereotype because we want to be cool or trendy or anything like that, but instead because we desire to not be bound together by the rightness of our theology, but instead the way we love our neighbor, that is what binds us together. Our love for Jesus, the model that Jesus gave us for love, that's what binds us and how we act toward one another. God, allow that to be our highest goal. Allow us to ask questions. If there's questions deep within us about who you are, God, the journey of exploring that question could be the most freeing for our faith and even for our actions. And so let's tell somebody the questions we're wrestling with about who God is, about who Jesus is, about how to do faith, about the church. May we be people who are not afraid to ask the questions. And God, I especially recognize that we are at the year mark for many people. This last week has represented a year since a shutdown in our country. God, this has been a difficult year. Incredibly difficult. For some of us, we've lost loved ones. We've been challenged with unemployment or with setbacks at work, whether that's a lower income or no income. God, we've maybe even dealt with mental health on a new level as we're not able to be amongst our friends and our family. This has been a tough year for many of us. God, may we all take a breath. God, remind us that your grace is for us. Some of us are coming out of this feeling like failures, feeling broken by this year. Remind us that we aren't. God, some of us are still grieving or have maybe dealt with so much loss in the last year that we don't even know how to start the process of grieving. God, I pray that you would just be with those who are grieving, that they would feel your presence as they enter in that grief, and that they would feel that this community is here for them in the midst of that. Others of us are just at the finish line and we're like, can we just cross this finish line already? And we're growing impatient. God, remind us that love is patient. God, as we all are going to be carrying wounds from the last year, we pray that you would be working in us to help us process those, to help us know that you are with us the whole time and you're going to be with us the whole time, even as we're processing and recovering from it. And God, may we see this community as a support system. On our most difficult days, on our worst days, we need one another. And so may we reach out when we need help. God, may we be love to those around us who we know that need help, that are struggling as they journey through what the last year has been. God, the best way we can overcome church stereotypes is to just center our entire being around love. If we could be a place that elevates love above everything else, that will challenge some of the stereotypes that people have these days about the church. And so give us the ability to do that, the strength to do it, the awareness to do it, to lead with love in all we do. In your name, amen.
Once again, we want to give you a quick thank you for joining us today. We sincerely hope the gathering was joyous for you as well as was fruitful for you. Again, if you'd like to stay connected with us, again, especially if you're a first-time visitor with us, please feel free to check out our website at thebelongcollective.org, and likewise check us out with our socials on Facebook and Instagram. We wish you all the best and we wish you peace as you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thank you very much.